An FDIC recap wouldn't be complete without mentioning the latest from On Scene Solutions, our podcast sponsor. This year, On Scene showcased its latest in fire apparatus solutions, including a 1,000-pound rated aluminum transverse toolboard with 70% extension for 40 to 96-inch deep pass-through compartments. Also on display was On Scene's configurable sliding cargo tray, complete with customizable tray separators, adjustable tie-downs, and fold-down gates. If you're trying to spec a tough fire truck, don't forget to spec On Scene at onscenesolutions.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of a podcast from Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. My name is Nick Wilbur. Have Win Slauch with us, as always. Bringing back Alex Moody back onto the podcast. And then for the first time, we have Tom Shan. For those of you who don't know, it's a pretty big fire service legend. If you are looking into speccing a fire truck, talking fire trucks, that's kind of the main guy out there. Been doing it for a long time, and I'll let Tom kind of dive into his background and kind of introduce himself, and then we can kind of dive into this episode. Tom?
All right. Yeah, thanks so much, Nick. I got my start in the fire service September of 1970, walking into the College Park Fire Department as a freshman at the University of Maryland. Spent a great 3.5 years there. Very fortunate to have 32 years in the apparatus industry with different manufacturers working in engineering, sales, and management positions. So I've been in the fire service since that time. I've been very fortunate a number of years ago to meet up through a mutual friend that Nick's father, Mike, we got introduced at a Firehouse Expo, and it was pretty interesting, and done a lot of work over the years with that great work that Nick and Win are following up with, doing fleet reviews, helping departments assess their current apparatus, or helping them wherever they are in the process of apparatus spec work. Just finished up working a great 11 years of working with the Navy and Marine Corps Fire and Emergency Services, doing their work with everything with their apparatus fleets, a bunch of different vehicles. So had a great run, and really privileged to be on the podcast with you gentlemen today. So back to you, Nick.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate you taking the time out today, and I think it kind of goes to what we're going to speak about today, the kind of past and the present. And this is kind of a review of FDIC and kind of what was out there. And I think there's going to be some great perspectives for Alex Moody. That was the first time going to FDIC, first time kind of seeing everything. And then, the opposite side of the coin, Tom Shan, who's been there for numerous years in different positions and different capacities, and has seen it before it was FDIC even, and kind of seen how the show has grown and kind of morphed into what it is today. I guess we'll start from the brand new perspective. Moody, what did you think of FDIC? What's your experience as a first timer, and really any advice you could pass along to anybody that's looking to maybe go to the show in the future as a first timer?
Yeah. Good afternoon. So, to me, I mean, if I had to give it one word, impressive would probably be a good word to kind of sum it up, but there's a lot. And I mean, for me, I was lucky enough to be kind of preempted by you and Win, and to hear, all right, this is kind of the spectacle that is there. And it's a good thing that there is a spectacle, right? Because it gets people excited about the fire service and gets people kind of amped up to learn, train, see new things. So like, that's part of the experience. I think that's kind of the purpose of a big industry conference like that. So that's awesome to see. And I think everybody there had a really great attitude and was motivated to share information and learn and talk and exchange info. So that was kind of the general vibe of the experience, was this is big, and that was cool. You guys kind of told me that was going to happen, and you were absolutely right. I felt like my brain had ran a number of laps by the time I left there. And you're not going to see everything. I think all three of you kind of at one point told me, listen, you got to absorb what you can, but there is too much here. In every direction you look, there's something different to look at. And before we went, you had given me the advice to kind of be focused. I was focused on looking at apparatus for the most part and looking at different rescue equipment and stuff like that. So that was the lane I stayed in, was kind of my lane, and expanding and learning from Win, looking at different apparatus manufacturers and just seeing what is out there. So there was a lot just in that kind of narrow scope for me to look at. But then as you're walking along, you're going from one booth and like, all right, I'm going to go down and check these guys out. Along the way, there's about 200 things that you're gonna get distracted and start walking off and finding other things. But that's the neat part, because you'll find stuff you weren't really looking for, you didn't know existed, or you didn't know there was somebody that was an expert of a thing, and you overhear a conversation, and there was no problem, I think, at any booth I showed up to just sort of stand there and listen and absorb to whatever conversation was going on there. The other thing I definitely noticed, if you show up there with a mindset and kind of a goal of what you want to do, you're going to accomplish that. I think for me, it would have been very overwhelming if I just showed up as like lone wolf just to go hang out and try and absorb things. I don't know that I would have gotten as much out of it without a plan ahead of time. And some of that comes from the influence of who you're around. Like anything, if you go anywhere with your buddies that you just hang out with and enjoy hanging out with and having fun and having a drink or two or something, then you're going to do that. But if you go somewhere with a goal in mind, you're going to probably lean into that goal. So that would be my advice for anybody who's new out there. Figure out what you're interested in, what you want to look at, and stick to those things. And don't be afraid to veer off the beaten path a little bit as you're going around to the stuff you want to see, and ask questions. But surround yourself like I did. I was lucky enough to be surrounded by you gentlemen. Very knowledgeable people. So if I had a question, I immediately had somebody next to me that I could ask. Not everybody has that luxury. But if you can put yourself into a situation with people that are smarter than you, then that's probably the best way to get the most bang for your buck at FDIC. Those were my kind of initial thoughts. The other thing I liked is you can kind of, outside of the conference, like every time we went to dinner, I mean, I saw people that I'd been in training classes with. I saw people I've seen, met in other departments, just in minor travels in my circle. So that was kind of neat to reconnect with people and just talk shop with people you don't cross paths with all the time. When you're in the middle of getting training and classes and you're in it, you see these people, and then you kind of stop taking as many classes sometimes, in terms of like a regular, like every month you're in a different class. That slows down as life moves on sometimes, and you're in classes every couple times a year, and you reconnect with those people. So that was a neat thing. It's kind of a big collection of people that you can learn from outside of the conference experience itself. So,
hey, so Alex, that's your first time in 2024, and the digital age where you have the ability to kind of preempt, like you said, plan, see what you want to look for. Tom, what was your first time like when you went to FDIC, or it probably wasn't even FDIC at that point? How did your first experience differ from Alex's?
It's kind of interesting. So my first one was in 1982. I was just finishing up a career working for the Insurance Services Office, ISO, which at the sponsorship of FDIC had just transferred from ISO to the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. So it was 1982. And at that time, it was...
Not to interrupt you real fast, but I see these two smirking because they weren't even alive at that point.
Yeah, well, okay. I can
really
I can clearly claim the title of senior senator here on the podcast.
I didn't have a whole lot of time on the earth at that point either. But sorry to interrupt you there. I just saw laughing in the background.
So for the group listening, you can figure out I am old. There's no question, no hiding. So in 1982, in Memphis, Tennessee, I was selected by the folks at ISO to say, would you like to go down to this conference? And I had read about it previously. Again, it was just not strictly 1982. There is no internet. There is no social media. If you wanted to communicate with someone, you either old school, you found their phone number and you called them, or you wrote a letter. All right. So going to the conference, the ramp up to that to me was like, this is like as a youngster, having your parents take you to FAO Schwartz in New York City, the week before Christmas, because you had no idea what you were going to see. So prior to me being in the apparatus industry, at that time, again, because you didn't have all those different interactions, the manufacturers would largely use that conference and one other that was later in the year to introduce new products. And this then was a complete surprise. Walking in the door, I mean, I was completely overwhelmed. Again, I think they were probably passing out a floor plan, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to, navigate through all the different exhibits to see everything? Now, the interesting part, as I recall, and again, we're going way back, the exhibits were limited in hours, and they were segregated from when the classes were going on. So if you wanted to go take a training class, and I sat in on a number of ones, Nick, don't ever tell your father, even back then, I remember sitting in on an engine class that was taught by the chief of training from Memphis. And after the class, I went up and introduced myself, said, hey, I'm hanging around for an extra day. Is there any way that you could set me up to do a few fire station visits? Again, prior to the internet, how did you find out where a fire station was? You bought an old school Rand McNally map and hoped the stations were plotted. Or back then, there was a publication called Fire Service Digest that was a quarterly publication. And in each issue, they would list major cities and have a listing of the station locations and, as best that they could find out, what rigs were there. So the training chief linked me up, and on my extra day, I'm going around knocking on doors of Memphis fire stations, even back then, taking pictures of fire trucks. And the highlight of that trip was to see the Memphis pipe, which, if you're not familiar with what that is, we can talk about it later on, but a pretty cool appliance. So the show was just, again, to me, completely overwhelming. Not nearly the size that it is today, nor the attendance, but having no run up to what you were going to go see as compared to today. For the last 4 or 5 years, there's guys, whether they're apparatus buffs or work in the industry, a couple of days before the move-in and the rigs are being staged outside Lucas Oil Stadium, there's people out there taking pictures of the rigs. And obviously, the different manufacturers and component suppliers will give you, little preemptions, again, via social media as to what they're about to, to show and unveil. So you kind of have a little bit of a clue. But like Alex, I mean, every time I'm going in there, even though I have a plan and I'm old school, I get the floor plan and I actually make notes. Here's the places where I want to go. I don't want to be sitting in aisle 1100 and then figure out where this vendor is, and you're kind of bumping around. It's, kind of like being in Midtown, New York City, where you can't get too far lost because everything's in rectangular blocks. If I'm trying to go find this vendor, where the heck are they if you can't find his banner? So, yeah, very different experience. But again, it just never gets old to me. It was an incredible experience from start to finish. And all the years in the apparatus industry, where now I'm cleaning rigs and doing all the run up to the show. It's, I've seen it kind of from both sides of the fence. So a pretty neat experience from start to finish.
I think, you hit on a couple points there, and, obviously the training portion of it, is great. And I think, some of the local shows, we've kind of seen that pop up a bit more on social media and more in conversations, that there's a lot of local shows and local places to get training. Obviously, FDIC is the big show, right? That's where a lot of the greatest training comes out of, and the great instructors kind of come together. We're going to put that off to the side for now, the training aspect, and really dive into that equipment or apparatus. I think, Win and I have talked about this before, and I'm going to throw it over to Win here for a second. But, looking at apparatus and equipment, if you were getting ready to purchase something, if you were even in the next couple of years, or just wanted to see what's out there. I mean, I don't know that there's any comparison to find that many rigs or see that many different, manufacturers come together in one place in a convenient spot. So Win, what are the benefits of going to FDIC if you're buying a rig? And then we'll kick it to Tom after. I mean, with that deep experience, and we can kind of see both sides of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think going there, with the intention of buying a rig, I think it gives you the ability to have access to almost anybody that you want to talk to. Most manufacturers are going to bring a chassis engineer, a body engineer, the motor guy, the pump guy. And if they're not there, you're going to find whether it's a Cummins or a Packard dealer or Waterous or Hale, you're going to find Darley. You're going to find all those pumps and that capability there. So you can get all your technical questions answered, tires, suspensions, things like that. All those people are going to be there, and you can have those conversations with them to help you dial in what you want to do. That you're not going to get that, anywhere else where you can walk from one end of the room to the other and talk to the different manufacturers all in one day, compare information, go back and forth, and again, get everything back from them. The same thing with the different apparatus vendors. You can go kick all the tires you want, open, close doors, look at the different types of, the way apparatus is built. Is it a foreign body? Is it a extruded body? How are the cabs built? What are they built out of? How do the windows function? I know one of Tom and your dad's favorite things was to sit in the driver in the passenger seat and see what it looks like out the window. What can you see? What do you want to avoid, putting on the doghouse that's going to block the driver's view, or vice versa? If you're in a commercial cab, and I know you and I did this at Work Truck, where's your limited, viewpoints? Like, what are you missing with the motor sitting out in front of you? Things like that. You get to see the different size hose beds, ladder layouts, everything. We can go on and on about all that. Compartment layouts. Again, one of Tom, I think his biggest thing, and I don't want to speak for him, but is how are the tools laid out? How did the company set up their compartments? What did they do? What's the pump panel look like? Things like that. And you get all these ideas, and you can answer questions, take pictures. And I think that if you are in the, fire truck building process or, speccing process, that a show, and it can be any show. FDIC is just one of the largest ones. But any show where you can go and see that and see all of it at once, I think that's just, it pays itself off in dividends at the end of the day. So that's, I think that's the benefit of it. Again, there's so much that you could dive into every little bit of that and break it all out into millions and millions of little things that we probably don't have the time for today.
Yeah. I think the component part was good too. Like, if you want to pull out trays, there's 10 different manufacturers and people that can offer that, the different pumps, right? You don't even have to go talk to the manufacturer you might buy the fire truck from. You're going to go talk directly to the other manufacturer. We did that with suspension systems. We're talking to different manufacturers and, even posing questions to the engineers and like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And it kind of helps create that, I guess bridge that gap of fire service to, product or, equipment manufacturer where, hey, there's some issues here. Can you fix them? Or we never got asked that question before. And it kind of opens up maybe new doors to maybe having some new technology the next year or the year after.
And it's, same thing you're looking at, even like we stopped to look at the slides that people are using on the trucks and trying to figure out what type of material they're made out of and what the weights are. And, because again, all that's going to pay out in the end. If you put, a steel slide in your fire truck, then the chances of it rusting down the road are going to be bad. If you can, change that to aluminum or stainless, and then, we're going to improve upon that. So knowing that up front, I think is, again, and having those conversations with the manufacturers, like you said, they don't know that's a problem unless you point it out to them sometimes.
Tom, what are your thoughts? Go ahead, Moody.
From my perspective, because for a few things, I was chasing Win around like a puppy dog, just trying to absorb information while he was asking questions. And as, the stuff that was outside, like talking to some of the different about some of the suspensions and stuff, I have a clue about those things, but Win had very specific questions to answer. So this is just advice to anybody who's going maybe for the first time or they've been there, but now like you guys are talking about, somebody's trying to buy a new fire truck. Find somebody. I don't know if you need to bring a mechanic from your district or wherever, but if you do have those questions, I wouldn't have known beyond the surface level what questions to ask that Win was asking. But I learned a lot by having somebody who knew the right questions to ask these engineers so they could give us the right information, if that makes sense. So if you know you're delving into deep water that you don't normally tread into, find somebody to go with that can do that, and then you can take notes off in the side in the corner. That was just something that I benefited greatly from, and I didn't really expect to.
I remember that following around Tom here. I mean, the first couple of times I'm sitting there and I'm burning up paper, basically trying to write as fast as they're talking. I'm like, you can't ask that question. And they give an answer, and it's like, I guess you can, like, right? Like, this is the place to do that, to ask those questions. I'm like, that's such a technical question. It's like, these are the engineers and the people making the product. Like, they're the ones that are going to know the answer. And it's crazy that you can have that interaction sometimes.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, there was an engineer that looked at Tom about 3 questions in and said, "Oh, I remember you." Because those questions started getting deep real quick.
No, Win hit on a good point. I mean, there's a proliferation of shows, but nothing that can compare to FDIC, where the manufacturers and the component people, they're bringing the proverbial best and brightest folks to be able to go answer those kinds of questions. The one feature that I really like, in addition to when Alex had mentioned about, trying to walk down 200 yards and run into a whole bunch of other people, one of it is the networking capability that you have, beyond maybe recognizing, and I'm pretty conservative and like to stay to myself in my own lane, I think, as you mentioned. But if you'd be walking around and maybe wouldn't notice somebody's facial recognition, but happen to see their badge and see they're from so-and-so fire department. There's been times I've gone up and introduced myself, particularly if they had a rig there, and said, hey, could you have a couple of minutes that I could just ask you some questions about your thought process of how you designed that vehicle? There was a couple of booths in particular where there was like representatives of the fire department there. So in addition, you can kind of get the sales pitch from the salesperson or from the factory person. You can actually talk to the user and say, what were you doing or thinking to be able to, come up with this particular design? I did note this year at FDIC, which I think was a really big benefit, particularly for attendees, there were a few more rigs that were outfitted. Now, whether they were done just for the show or, whatever, there was a couple of heavy rescues for sure. All right. That had all the tools and everything mounted. A 26-foot tandem axle rescue truck looks very impressive, from the physical size, and you can kick the tires and look at the warning lights, but how are those compartments configured? So when you see what somebody did with the available space, and then Wynn had mentioned about taking pictures, again, I'm old school. More and more of the manufacturers now are going to, and this is where dear old Tom's got to tap out. They've got the QR code. If you want more information, here's the QR code on the dashboard. I'm like, just give me an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that's got the stats for the rig and a little blueprint on the back. Even at my age, I can read that. All right. And there's all the dimensions. So you can take the picture and come back. And then when you're using it in a committee, or like the one of the first times, Nick and Wynn, you introduced me to Alex, and here's the rescue specialist. I can look at some of this equipment and maybe identify it. You guys know how to use it, how to test it, how to train with it, and then most importantly, how to use it in different configurations to be able to have access to that level of talent. All right, and again, kind of go around in the groups. I'll have to say that when I was on the sales side of things at a show, you'd be a little wary if more than 3 people, all with nameplates from the one department, showed up, and you're like, I'm thinking that you're going to have a shootout at the OK Corral here. Somebody's got to be upset over something, So I'd kind of scout out their name and like, man, that's not a rig I worked on. Let's get you hooked up, or how can we help you? But again, just the experience that you have there to be able to network and get around. And again, just want to reinforce Alex's thing. You really need to have a personal plan. All right. Because you could be there for all 3 days for every, opening hour of the show. And you'd still end up at some point, somebody will text you, a photo later on and said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And I'm like, I walked right past the booth and I didn't even know that was there because I was on a mission to go look at something else. So, having kind of a somewhat flexible but definitive plan. Here's the places I want to try to knock out. And again, there's just no other show that I have ever been to over the period of years where, whether you have an issue with particularly with one of the component folks, you're saying, hey, and a lot of times, I think particularly today, post pandemic, a lot of folks kind of get frustrated, even though we have all these medias to be able to communicate with folks, and you send out an email and it doesn't go anywhere. You talk to your local salesperson that sold you the rig, and I'm making this up. You're having some minor electrical issue, non-related to the chassis, and you're just trying to track down, why is the flashing pattern on my lights kind of not working the way we had set it up? Not that you're going there to ambush folks, but it's an opportunity really to learn, to be able to talk to the folks. And a lot of times, as I've found, people get all twisted up over a minor issue, and then you talk to the folks and go, hey, you do this, this, and this, and problem solved. And no, the rig doesn't need to go out of service. It's a great, I think, learning opportunity, no matter what particularly lane you're in. Alex also made a great comment about, bringing a mechanic or partnering with someone that has like interests with you, and you kind of go around and you tag team and you learn off of one another. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead.
Just going back to two things, kind of there. One thing that Tom said is you're not sure, like the light pattern thing, or like when you and I were at work truck with Whalen, and it ended up being, hey, why can't this light do this? And then the guy brings a spec up on his phone and he's like, oh, well, it only has 4 inputs and you need 5 inputs to do that. And that, that answers your question. You're trying to build a truck around, the way this thing functions, and you get that answer right there. And the other thing, with all the apparatus manufacturers being there, and I think this is a really cool thing, is that no matter what your budget is, you're going to find somebody there who can build your truck, or you can fit the truck within your budget. And then you can go and you can concentrate on that and have conversations with them and get, a view of that truck. Whereas if, you're going to use a small manufacturer, you might not have the capabilities to travel to that manufacturing company and see how they build their apparatus. But now you can see it in person, at that show. So, I think that's another really important aspect of being at that show. Again, like Tom said too, you get the who's who of that company at that show to answer those questions. There was lots of questions that again, we follow people around. We all followed Tom to the Cummins booth to get information on what 26 looks like for us. What does it look like when they put this new engine in service? Is it even going to be ready at that point? What are the apparatus manufacturers doing at that? And again, you got the guy who gave us all the answers that he could up to that point, the best answers that he could. So I think we everybody go with somebody who really knows what they're asking. Leverage the manufacturers that are there to get the information that you want and look at everything. I know, I was out there kind of with 2 different agendas, and it definitely is way too much to try to do 2 different things at once. You miss so much when you're doing that, but that's the great thing about that is you do have the ability to do that.
One thing, I mean, you brought up the motor change, and I think that is a great segue into what that can look like in the future, and kind of maybe why FDIC maybe look different this year than in previous years. And from what I saw out there wasn't really a whole lot of new sparkly things. And from what I gather, again, just me looking from the outside in, going a couple of times, I think there's a lot of pressure to what, and I guess unknowns of what that motor might do to the apparatus manufacturers, and how they're going to fit it and what it might look like and costs and everything else. And with the industry being where it is, I mean, just playing catch up in general to keep, to meet the demand that's out there. So, I mean, Tom, do you want to, provide just a bit of information maybe that you received from there and maybe your thoughts on what the apparatus industry kind of might be doing or thinking about with your experiences there? Just, what your thoughts are on, I guess, all of that.
No. I think good segue, Nick. I spoke to a number of friends who are salespeople for different manufacturers, and no matter where they were geographically in the country, just say, hey, how's business? Have things slowed down as compared to what they've been like, for over the last 24 to 30 months? And in general, the consensus was, yeah, it's starting to, slow down a little bit, to be able to, vendors in particular mentioned, in the last month or last quarter, we finally were producing more units, shipping more units than we took in with new orders. So that enabled them to bring the backlog down, even if it was by a couple of weeks. But they saw a little bit of mediation in that. Much to my surprise, no one told me that, they had any, pushback from a prospective customer just saying, sorry, the rig's gotten too darned expensive. We're going to stop. We've got to take a timeout, reassess where we're going, go back and maybe look at rehabbing or go buying a used rig. No one seemed to think, no matter what the price point was, people are still, ordering new rigs, and they're taking orders for rigs, no matter what the cost is, particularly in the area of aerial and rescue units, which have, some of the longest lead times. So I thought that part was kind of perspective. No one really was able to say, hey, whatever your definition of back to normal is, all right, to me, back to normal is at some point, could we expect to get pumpers in 10 to 12 months, aerials in 14 to 18 months, and maybe rescue trucks in the same time frame, or maybe a couple months longer because of the man hours involved or because of the degree of customization? No one was able to, had a crystal ball to say, yeah, it's, hey, Tom, by July 2028, we get a couple years, we get a year or so under our belt with the new engines. Yeah, we're really confident that things are going to smooth out. Because of the engine changes, I think the industry, this went to your point, Nick, there's nobody rolling out the new improved whatever, because they've kind of have to wait for, the principal engine supplier to completely define what the requirements are going to be for the packaging of that engine, the new engines, and for the cooling. And with a couple of vendors, they're certainly going to have to look at doing some degree of modifications within their cab and chassis. That's going to take engineering time and draw that away from engineering time that would be placed on orders that are in-house for things they have to do. So 3 quick things that kind of struck me overall, that just by walking around, general observation and not in order of preference. But I did think it was nice that there was a increasing number of manufacturers that were showing tractor drawn ladders in different configurations. So if you're in the market for a tractor drawn, whether it's going to be a straight truck or a combination, as they do it on the West Coast, kind of a rescue / ladder company, and you need to carry a lot of ground ladders, there were some excellent examples to look at. And in 2 cases, there were representatives of those fire departments in the booth. You could talk to them. You say, how do you make the decision that was the ground ladder complement that you wanted? Because I think, as you and Wynn have spoken previously, in the new 1900 standard, the requirement for ground ladders is up to the authority having jurisdiction. I know your dad's predicting somebody's going to buy a Quint at some point with no ladders on it, but you need to do that assessment. It's kind of the same way as an engine company. You can buy 5 adjustable hosebed dividers. Well, how are you going to set up the back end? It needs to work in your community. So that was one thing that struck me. The second thing was a number of even major manufacturers that were showing stock or demonstrator rigs. no company's name on them, and showing, because if you want to buy a fully customized, we'll build it exactly to what you want. Yeah, we'll put you on the waiting list, and you're going to be 36 to 48 months out, or wherever that time frame might take you. If you need something right away, we have stock units that might be hopefully somewhere 85 to 90% of what you want. And we can put you in something like that in a shorter time, because we've got stock rigs that are going down that stock line, not the highly customized line. So that's something that struck me, that given the expense involved with, transporting the rig to get it to Indianapolis, to coming from wherever, and to clean it and detail it and all that stuff, that was kind of interesting, because normally in the past you would show, highly customized, everything would be a one of a kind. And invariably, there'd be a couple of rigs, you'd just be there scratching your head. It's like, I need to talk to somebody from this jurisdiction, because what kind of fires do you have that you need something like this? The third thing, and again, this is just very prejudiced for me personally, less blacked out rigs, that had the complete blackout package where you've blown the Visa Gold card on Line X and whatever your favorite color is. So a little bit of I think, back to reality. Maybe that has kind of run its course a little bit. But those were the things that just impressed me, just in general, of walking around. A couple of just really well detailed, fully equipped rescue trucks, which was nice to see. Going back to Alex's forte, a big rig's impressive, but show me. It's like going through a model home and the guy's showing you the walk-in closet and you're trying to figure out, okay, where's the shelving and everything going? I know my wife's going to figure out how to fill it up. But, showing a fully dressed out and equipped rig, particularly, where every compartment is detailed, I think just shows so much better and shows the manufacturer's capability to package the rig. And again, because of the way the industry's going, your factory, back in the day, one of the manufacturers I work with, we prided ourselves on in-house to do custom tool mounting. There's so much of that now has to be outsourced, because the people can't spend 200 or 250 hours where they could be producing a new fire truck and doing exactly what Alex or Tom or Nick or Wayne want in that particular compartment. That's somebody else's bailiwick. But it was neat to be able to see a number of rigs that were fully dressed out.
I guess, Alex, for the rescue trucks there and being outfitted, I know there's a couple conversations we had of, with Arlington getting ready to kind of make the jump into the new rescue squads, replacing maybe every 8 years. And with the lead time now, it kind of is a pretty quick turnaround, but that there are things that we can kind of look at. And, I guess was it helpful for you, I guess, to see some of that stuff? Because again, that wasn't always the case. It was a rare thing, and I think it's becoming more common, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was super helpful to have the compartmentation fully built out. Especially, I mean, we're getting ready to go back into that market to get another set of rescues. And we have all these ideas, right? We have had conversations in the station about, hey, it'd be really cool in the next one if we did this, because we're finding maybe we talked about this with the combination stuff, but maybe we don't need the hard-lined hydraulic tools anymore, right? So, now you saw these rescues on the floor where they're making decisions, and some of them have them and some of them have moved completely away. They're kind of a generation in front of us, the ones we're currently on, where we have both, right? We had trust issues, so we have both sets of tools on our rig right now. But I was able to see rescues where they had fully committed, or they also had some trust issues. So, which is fair, and you kind of, to Tom's point, you got to talk to some of these representatives of what is the reason you did that. And for some people it was trust issues. Other people were, no, we already had some of these tools, so we decided to keep them because they're still serviceable and working. So, I mean, just finding out those nuanced decisions they made was really useful, and seeing their complement of stabilization tools, what tools they chose to pick to put on their rig. You could talk to them about those things and see their compartmentation, because there is a million different ways to mount these things in compartments, and none of them wrong, right? But every rig I looked at had something a little different, and there was things to look back on, and you could take back to our department, and anyone could go here and take those ideas, take a bunch of pictures, and go back to their department and say, hey, I think this would be a lot better way to do this. Because you can get on the internet and search as many pictures of heavy rescues as you want, but until you're standing next to it and you're like, oh, this is how high I have to reach to get this heavy fan or this stabilization strut off of here, that gives you like real tactile experience you won't get on your computer screen or on your phone while you're looking things up and chatting about it at the kitchen table over a cup of coffee. So I thought that was really interesting for sure, especially at the point in time we're in our department. The other thing I had an opportunity to do that was, I don't know that I would fly out the last day in the evening again. I flew in with wind, and then I had to wait until the night time, like 5:00, the last day of FDIC. But that day offered me an interesting experience because everybody else from our group was gone. So it was just me, my backpack, and my suitcase walking around the show floor. But at that point I said, you know what, I'm not going to go to all the big names. I've gone to them. I've looked at all of them. I've talked to those people, and those are interesting. And I still looked at them, but I looked at the smaller booths that maybe didn't have a ton of crowds around them. And there are some people out there with really creative solutions that maybe for your larger jurisdictions, these are not solutions you need. But there's some people out there doing some innovative stuff, and they managed to get a booth at FDIC, and they have a place at the table, if you will. So if you are a smaller department, there's people also in small departments coming up with solutions for stabilization and extrication. And if you're doing combination rigs, like we talked about ad nauseum, there's solutions for that stuff. And I got to, there's one gentleman, I feel like me, I can't remember the name of his company, or I would happily shout it out, but he came up with a solution for stabilization because in his department, they're lucky if they got 3 people in the station at any given time and they're responding to vehicle accidents. So he manufactured this solution for stabilization that one person can set up on their own to try and effect a rescue. Not necessarily applicable to us in Arlington, but for a smaller department, that would be amazing. So look in the corners and look for these smaller people there. I mean, there's a lot of creative people showing up to FDIC in addition to the big names that are also trying to innovate and push things forward. So that was a neat opportunity. And it was a little quieter that day. There was a little less people around because a lot of people were flying out. So I had an opportunity to get away from the hustle and bustle and see the other things occurring that you're not going to pay attention. The first time I walked into the show floor, I walked right past these booths. I didn't see them at all. I didn't even know they were there. And then that quiet time, I was able to see them. So that's just a little nugget for people.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we've covered a decent amount about FDIC now. I guess we'll kind of go around the horn here and just kind of give closing remarks and kind of sum it up. And I think we covered FDIC and why it's a great show, and some really good reasons for the equipment side. Why to go. And I think really the biggest point is that the engineer side, right? We can see salesmen and salespeople wherever. For any of these products, for the most part, these local shows, we're not always getting that engineer necessarily. So we'll start with Win, and we'll kind of move around and just any advice if you're going to FDIC next year, and maybe the why it might be important to go if you weren't considering it.
Yeah, well, I think like everybody, I think we're gonna go with a plan. I think that's the first thing that we've all kind of said is you have to have that plan of at least the outline of what you're looking to see, because again, there is so much there, right? So have like, hey, this is what I need to see. This is what I'm going to do. If I have extra time, and then if I really have extra time, like Moody did, then we're going to break out into this. Like Alex said, look in the alcoves, look at everything that you can, because need, kind of drives innovation, right? So somebody else out there might have exactly what you need, and they might have already solved the problem for you. That's again the great thing of looking at and having all that different apparatus there is somebody's probably already done what you're trying to do, and it's just trying to find it. And if not, at least you get an idea of how to lay a compartment out or anything. And again, like, we're out there in the process of building a tiller truck, and we have the ability to look at different tillers, and we're talking about heights and, why one manufacturer is a foot lower than the other manufacturer and what they have to do to get there. And that's a great way to see that that again, you don't get to see, where you can go and look at one and then walk to the other end of the floor and look at the other one and compare the two almost side by side. You're not going to get that anywhere else other than a trade show. And again, it doesn't necessarily matter the trade show, but that's where you're gonna that's where you're gonna have that ability to again, do that. I think that's the biggest thing that you can get out of that, is you have the ability to see everything at once, and work through problems in your mind. So again, you want to go out there with things that you want to solve, problems you want to solve, or items that you're looking at that drive you to the end line when you're trying to build a fire truck. I think that's the biggest thing to get out of any trade show that you're going to, is help you drive yourself to the finish line of where you're going to be. And I think another thing is it can help you challenge if you are dealing with one manufacturer and you see another manufacturer doing something that you really want. Again, your need might drive that manufacturer to do something. Or you can say, hey, this company can do it. What can you do that offers us, the same kind of the outcome? This is what we need it to do. How can you get us there? So, again, it just gives you that ability to see everything at once. If you have the time to do it. And, again, I think that the amount of money and, trade shows, training seminars like that can get relatively expensive, when you talk about hotel rooms and the cost, but the trade show itself, when you're looking at building or buying something, is a drop in the hat. It's not very expensive to do a 3-day trade show pass. If you're willing to give up a couple of the nightlife things and things like that, you can do the whole experience, relatively, financially, stable and get what you want out of it. So, I think that's all there and capable of doing if you're willing to give up a couple things.
Absolutely. Tom, any closing remarks?
Yeah, just leveraging off what the other folks said. Again, kind of old school. Bring some of your business cards, right? And if you make contact with someone, you get their business card. All right. Everybody, it was relatively few times this year as compared to previous years where people say, well, let me scan your badge to get your information. If you make a significant contact and say, wow, this could be a great resource for me, don't be afraid to ask for the gentleman or the woman's business card. And I probably leave there and more than double the weight of my baggage when I'm home, because I still collect old school catalogs and literature. And when you're working on a spec, it's one thing to say, yeah, oh yeah. I've had people say, you can download that stuff. Well, unless you're going to be working off of 2 or 3 screens, it can drive you crazy to say, okay, hey, I need to make sure I got the right model of this whatever, and it's about a 16-digit number to get it in the spec. I work by having the catalogs and the other literature there. And a combination of those things, I think one of the best things, you can become a very educated consumer by attending that show and making as many interactions with the vendors as you can.
Yeah, awesome points. I definitely couldn't agree more. And there's a lot there that people need to digest and take home with them. I mean, an educated consumer, we preach that all day long, and I think you're right. That's the best place to get that education. Alex?
Yeah, I agree with everything Wynn and Tom said. And then in addition, I would just say, surround yourself, go out there with other people, with a group of like-minded individuals, and maybe a wider variety of experience, perhaps, because there was a lot of times where we all kind of went off our own directions because there was things we wanted to be looking at, and then we'd come back together and you could share all that information with each other. And sometimes that was a good way to see more without actually seeing more. So go out there with the right group of people, right mindset for whatever your goals are. Like Wynn said, go out there with a plan. If you go out there with a bunch of people who have a plan, you're all going to benefit exponentially more than if you're just kind of scattershotting it in a random way. So that would be, in addition to what we've already said, is that surround yourself with the right group and go out there and enjoy it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome points. I think for me, it's a culmination of it all. Like the training and stuff is great. The experience is great. The friendships, the contacts are all awesome. But For us at our heart of what we talk about, especially here on this podcast, the actual apparatus and that specking side. Tom brought it up with the surprising number of demo models there. And I think that kind of goes to some of the conversations that you've seen in podcasts around and people talk about the amount of energy and work it goes into specking a fire truck. Lynn brought it up. It's worth the price out there. If you're going to spend $2 million on a ladder truck, the couple $1,000s that it might be to get a couple people to go out there and stay in a hotel and go to the show is going to be well worth it, because at the end of the day, you're either going to find out that what you're doing is right or find out what you're doing is wrong. And, I look at pictures and, I go around and teach on the ladder side, all the lighting systems, at least, that we used to have, the old halogen lights on the side that were hooked up to a generator, and how tall they were and how, they kind of stood out and they kind of got in the way of operating the aerial ladder. And now you go to the show and none of that exists anymore. They're all nice, thin, flush mounted lights that are easily, avoidable, and they really don't get in the way of ladder operations. Well, if you spec'd a fire truck 15 years ago and that was the last one, you wouldn't even know some of that stuff exists and what your options are. And I think going just from booth to booth, between manufacturers of fire trucks and just the equipment manufacturers, you get such a great look at those things. And back to what Tom said, get those model numbers so you can throw them in a spec. Too many people now are getting a spec with the red flashy lights, the white scene lights, and, the big thing up top, and checking the boxes and saying, okay, right, we're not going through the spec and getting into the actual details of it. And again, not everybody can afford that, and the time frames can't be afforded. But I think, we're losing a little bit of that custom side of the fire truck. And not everything has to be custom, but one or two things that you see out there on the show could really affect that fire truck in a good way, or change your mind on something that you might not be doing the most correct way. So yeah, that's kind of the parting thoughts. If no one else says anything else, I think that was a great show, and I appreciate everybody listening in as always. If you have any feedback, anything that you'd like us to cover here on the show, please reach out to chris.mcloon at Clarion Events. We hope to see you on the next show. Thank you, Tom, for coming on the first time, and thank you, Wynn and Moody, for coming back.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
An FDIC recap wouldn't be complete without mentioning the latest from On Scene Solutions, our podcast sponsor. This year, On Scene showcased its latest in fire apparatus solutions, including a 1,000-pound rated aluminum transverse toolboard with 70% extension for 40 to 96-inch deep pass-through compartments. Also on display was On Scene's configurable sliding cargo tray, complete with customizable tray separators, adjustable tie-downs, and fold-down gates. If you're trying to spec a tough fire truck, don't forget to spec On Scene at onscenesolutions.com.